Thank you for watching TargetedWest.com. This is DJ Chris. The opinions of our guests are that of their own and not that of me or Targeted West. It is the Mother's Day edition, the 5th month, the 12th day of 2024. This is show number 112. We have a guest with us tonight. We will have a quick introduction, of course. Dr. Millicent Black is here with us. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and play that introduction that we have waiting for you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this special Mother's Day. I am thrilled to be here with you today as the co-host alongside my dear friend and mentor, DJ Chris. We are gathered here to introduce and learn from a phenomenal leader and author who has dedicated her life to empowering others. Reverend Dr. Millicent Yvonne Black was born and raised in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee. She was licensed and ordained in 1998 and has served in the church and in Christian organizations since she was a young adult, including founding the Fellowship of Christian Women in Hope for the Hurting Ministries and serving as Vice President of Outreach on the West Tennessee Area Board of Women's Aglow International. Currently, she serves as pastor of Refuge from the Storm Church, a unique conference call church designed as a spiritual haven specifically for individuals who have been marginalized from traditional church settings, particularly those experiencing organized stalking and electronic harassment. This church provides a vital community for those who otherwise might not have one. She holds a master's in marriage and family therapy from Tribeca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee, and earned her Doctor of Ministry degree in Christian Education and Social Justice in 2015 and a Master of Arts in Christian Ministries degree in 2016, both from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. As a passionate advocate for victims of domestic violence, she continues her education and advocacy work. Reverend Black is also an advocate, researcher, and looks forward to continuing her work in providing hope for the hurting and pursuing personal interests, like publishing her dissertation and writing about her experiences in a lawless society. She is the proud mother of 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. Today, we are here to celebrate and discuss Reverend Dr. Black's new book, Empowering Women Who Suffer in Silence from Domestic Abuse, From Victim to Voice. This pivotal work underscores her dedication to empowering women and providing them a voice through her advocacy and ministry. For all you early birds, Reverend Dr. Black hosts early morning prayer sessions at 7 a.m. Eastern every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, perfect for starting the day with a spiritual lift. For night owls, there's a Bible study and TI support group every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget, Refuge from the Storm hosts their weekly worship service every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, ensuring your weekend starts with spiritual enrichment. For more details on these inspiring gatherings, be sure to check out refugefromthestormchurch.org. Getting to know Reverend Dr. Black has been incredibly inspiring. Her commitment to fostering hope and strength in others is something I deeply admire. It is my great honor and joy to welcome her today. So without further ado, let's warmly welcome Reverend Dr. Millicent Black to share her insights and discuss her groundbreaking new book. Reverend Black, we are eager to hear from you.
Yes, we are. Go ahead. Tell us about your new book. I have it in the book club. And if you want to join the book club, I'll give a quick advertisement first. Then we'll let Dr. Black speak. Of course, this is the TI Book Club. We have 149 members. of the club.
It's time for the TI Book Club, where every book opens a door to new worlds and shared journeys. Here, we uncover hidden gems, specially selected for TIs, and always within your reach. Be part of a community that reads together, grows together, and sees the world through the same lens. Don't just listen to stories, live them with us. Join now at bookclubs.com/TI-bookclub/join, and let's turn the pages of adventure together.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Black, are you here?
Good evening. Yes, I am here.
Well, thank you for dropping by. God bless you. I appreciate your time. Your book is in our book club, like I said, and we're glad to have you with us. We'd like to learn more about your book about empowering women in an abusive situation, especially on a Mother's Day.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I tell you, I don't know, I'm going to have to negotiate with Tranquility to pay her for such a wonderful introduction. I became inspired to go to seminary by a person a minister who I had been referred to learn how to get a certificate so that I could teach Sunday school in a particular church that I had joined, not even expecting that it would lead to a doctorate degree. But the book came out of the degree. The book is my actual dissertation, which I wanted to prepare based on my experiences as a targeted individual, because I had been a target for 9 years at that time. So I graduated in 2015, and in 2020, I was introduced to a person who was going to be able to publish my book, get it on Amazon. We were going so fast, and I wasn't happy with the way things were going, not knowing that person was the perpetrator. However, the book was published, and I never did market it. But last fall, when Sister Gaji published her book, I asked her who did it, and she referred me to a person in Atlanta who has done a marvelous job preparing a new cover and updating it in some areas that now I'm very proud to talk about it as well as to market it. The book is entitled Empowering Women Who Suffer in Silence from Domestic Abuse, from Victim to Voice. Because it was a seminary setting, I was given instructions on what was required for the content of the book. We did Old Testament and New Testament stories from the Bible, and obviously I chose victims of abuse, which just happened to have been all women. But I also took a look at the biblical attitude toward victimization of women, as well as societal views about how victims of domestic violence should be treated. It was my idea that the church pays too little attention to victims of domestic abuse. I already had my own ideas about why that was. No personal intentions towards you, DJ, but it's basically around the matriarchal or patriarchal society that has never changed. When I was doing research on how the old theological leaders viewed domestic abuse, I found that John Calvin had said, if you have a wife who is out of order, he said, correct her, but after that, it's okay to box her head. Well, obviously, I was appalled at that. In today's society, it's somewhat similar in that the subject of domestic abuse is rarely brought up in the church, and that's usually because the deacon, the chairman of the deacon board or the chairman of the trustee board, and sometimes even the pastor himself is an abuser. nevertheless, there's still such a growing need of someone to stand up for the plight of women in particular, but men can also be abused. Statistics have them also counted as those who can be abused, but there's just a growing need of someone who would stand up for a woman, especially from a Christian perspective, and show her how God and how Jesus embraced them. Jesus never put the woman down. He always stood up for the woman and gave her a place of honor in front of men. And I was also pleased about that. But the one thing about the book that I am very excited about is, in my introduction, my mentors did not argue with me. I was able to discuss what's happening to us and how electronics is used in abuse. I think I was asked if I could read something from the book, and I'd like to just read these pages of the introduction.
That would be nice, yes, if you could. And just for the record, 70% of women are TIs.
You are so right. I prepared a 5-minute video. I went to one of those video kiosks in the mall and prepared several, actually, 5-minute videos. One of them was so dramatically accurate. It showed a real crime scene where you had your blood on the walls, you had sirens and lights going, and I talked about being electronically abused and gave the examples that being electronically abused is no different from someone walking up to you and hitting you with their fist or taking some object and beating you with it. It's no different. The only difference is that the perpetrator doesn't have to be seen. They don't have to be in your face, in your house, or anywhere near you, yet they leave the same marks. They leave the same psychological and emotional damage. So in my introduction, it reads, in this age of electronic technology, domestic abuse takes on a newly masked appearance. There are commercialized military weapons and surveillance equipment that can be purchased over the Internet and then be used as a weapon in covert harassment. Stalking can now be accomplished via the Internet and cell phones that allow at a distance hands-free assault, psychological and emotional abuse, and battery. Invasion of social networks like Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and others allow for identity theft and harassment that have driven some victims to suicide. Radio frequency identification chipping parties have been recorded in Miami and Mexico, and a mother with a syringe can chip her own daughter to be able to track her every move. So could a husband or intimate partner. Cell phones and car computers can receive spyware that allows either to be treated as if it's in the hands of a perpetrator. Your phone can be blocked, redirected, and recorded all via the Internet. Your car can receive commands to speed up, stall, brakes fail, door locks jam, and windows malfunction from a distance as far away as across the street or the nation. And I've had all of these things happen to me. This kind of harassment can be accomplished via the same satellite service that has become so popular for delivering radio or television to you as you drive long distances. The Department of Justice Battered Women's Project has a special advocate for victims of military abuse. Police and military abuse are treated in a category of its own due to the advanced training received for purposes of law enforcement. This population of victimized women, whether wife or intimate partner, is the last to tell. Why do they tell? What does this have to do with the church? The answer is your choir member, mother, an usher, teen, or maybe even the pastor may be involved in a marriage or have a violent and abusive partner. There might be covert or overt abuses in the home or the relationship, and they do not know where to turn for help. They cannot explain in terms that will not sound crazy and that they will not be humiliated. Previously, their only recourse was to keep silent. This book seeks to inform the victim and develop a manual or roadmap that can be used nationwide to train clergy and lay members to become agents of empowerment to those who suffer in silence from domestic maltreatment. This training will be accomplished by tackling the mountainous task of getting the church to listen to the silent screams of victims of violence. We must acknowledge that there is a silence that still prevails in the 21st century that began in the days of the biblical Hebrews. The truth about abuse is kept under lock and key because the super spiritual saints do not want to hear that there is a pink elephant in the sanctuary. Truth is only allowed from the Bible and not from those who have been beaten, isolated, financially deprived of support, or physically or emotionally battered, psychologically or emotionally battered. The Bible tells us, however, that both of her masters abused her. This is in Hagar's situation. She was given into sex slavery, forced to become a surrogate mother, and then she is sent away with nothing but her son. Text of Terror became a bestseller because Phyllis Treble dared to challenge the church to hear what happens in a society where there is no king, no leader in authority. From the woman caught in adultery to the woman at the well of Samaria, we must be willing to look past our fears of the truth, take off the mask, and stop pretending that our loved one, the deacon, the musician, and even the pastor may be an abuser. And then I go and just kind of describe what's found in the content of the chapters in very brief statements before the actual book begins.
That would be fine.
Are there any comments or questions so far?
We'll be opening up the microphone at 6:50, so you still have some time to talk.
Okay, all right. Well, in the table of contents, I talk about my ministry focus. We were required to have a church that worked along with us in our project, and so my local church here in Tennessee became my ministry focus. And what I was to do was to evaluate the church's needs, and that included taking a look at what's going on in my own city, in my own county, and in my own state as far as addressing the needs of domestic violence is concerned on from a legal standpoint, as well as from an awareness standpoint to pastors. And so part of my project was to do a phone survey to pastors of what their attitudes was towards victims of domestic violence and how aware they were or are of the need for such a ministry to come from the church itself. That was quite interesting. I think all of the pastors agree that there is a need for acknowledging and ministering to the needs of victims of domestic violence. When I got my master's in marriage and family therapy, which was back in 2003, the high-tech torture started right at 6 weeks to 2 months before I got the degree. And then I began to be challenged on whether or not I could provide psychological services to victims of abuse, knowing that they would not have any privacy. Ethics would not allow me to do that. So I never actually applied for the license, nor did I ever start a practice. So from then to now, I've lost possibly $2 million in income as a result of being targeted, because it started right at the point that I completed that degree.
That is terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. Unbelievable.
It was planned. It was planned to be just that way.
They take the bright people and knock them down. That's how the world seems to work these days, and for a while.
Absolutely. But there were some very interesting facts that came out during our research about the legal system in our county in particular. We have a domestic violence center here in this town, and the director went on to become a lawyer herself. There was a lot of difficulty getting orders of protection through the court system here in Maury County. The lawyer was quoted in our local newspaper as making a statement that said the problem with getting assistance for victims of domestic abuse in this county was law enforcement, the DA's office, and the judiciary, the judges. They were all privy to or subject to side with the male in spite of the proof or the evidence that the female had. There was one military guy who had literally been a police officer who stalked a medical doctor for 4 years. And he killed her in a department store parking lot and then killed himself. The newspaper wrote in the announcement that the sheriff's department had told her to get a gun. Now, she was a woman who had sworn to first do no harm, and they would not give her enough coverage to be safe wherever she went, but they advised her to buy a gun. That was actually told to me. I called Military One Source on the person who has been stalking me and is using military technology even to this day to harm me. And believe it or not, the guy in Military One Source told me, get a weapon, ma'am. Right. I've got a super soldier stalking me, and they want me to buy a gun.
And we're talking about our RW. We won't say his name.
Correct. Nevertheless, we'll go back to the book. I looked at the state of the art in this ministry model, and so what that meant was I reviewed books. I did book reviews. We were required to have 200 resources in our dissertation. That was made up of books, articles, journals. I had some videos that I had reviewed. And what I found is that the church, let me say theologians, are writing about the need for support for victims of abuse. Now, needless to say, if they won't talk about domestic violence where there's a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, or two partners who are experiencing violence in their relationship, it wasn't hard, and it is not hard to make the church be silent about the use of military weapons that has been used as training for local police officers through our own Department of Defense, right? And so there's a double problem going on in society today because our churches still ignore the plight of women who are victims of abuse, but they also all the more ignore our plight when we go to talk about it. And that is that we're being assaulted by weapons and we can't see who's doing it and those kinds of things. But there were men and women who wrote about abuse. And maybe several of the males were pastors and perhaps writing about their own experiences in trying to provide some kind of counseling to the victims. Then I looked at the biblical foundations. Again, I spoke about that a little while ago, and that was looking at the Old Testament stories as well as the New Testament stories. From each one, I had a special focus. So my special focus in the Old Testament was Judges 19, and it was about the Levites' concubine. Those of you who know your biblical history, the Levites were the priests. They were chosen by God to be the priests for the children of Israel. And the Levite had a concubine, which meant that he had more than one woman in his circle. Apparently, he had mistreated the concubine, and she left him and went back to her father. So he followed her to her father's house and over several days convinced her to go back with him, which she did. On the way back, they stopped at someone's house, like maybe to stay the night, and there was men from the tribe of Benjamin who were acting like they did in Sodom and Gomorrah. They were coming to the man's house to have their way with the man, not the woman. So these men were acting as sodomites. But the master of the house gave his daughter and the Levites' concubine to the men, who abused them all night long. And they left the Levites' concubine on the man's doorstep that next morning. She was all dead. Now, the thing that happened next was the most horrendous actions that I've ever heard of. Instead of them taking the concubine into the house and trying to care for her wounds, the Levite chopped her up into 12 pieces, and that each piece represented a piece of the tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel. And he put her body parts on a horse and rode the horse through the town. That became a testament against the people in the town, and God allowed the tribes of Israel to destroy all of the Benjamites who lived in that town, because none of them dared to stop the horrendous actions that were taking place. One of the key scriptures in the book of Judges, especially in that part, was when there is no king, every man did according to his own desires. That's almost where we are right now. We have presidents in the United States instead of kings. However, our president has no respect. Our past president has no respect. Both of them have their own issues, though they're both going to be running for the presidency in this year's election. But the main thing is that everyone is doing apparently according to their own desires. There's so much lawlessness in society today. There's so much cover-up going on about the illegal activities that is being done to us and to others. There's still a turning of the head away from what's happening, even to children that find themselves into the custody of the United States, as in the border crossing. And so we're kind of in that society today. We're kind of living where everyone's kind of doing according to what they want to, because hardly anyone feels like they're going to be challenged in their criminal behavior. We're believing God that just like in the days of the Benjamites, he's going to stand up on our behalf, and there will be some changes made. Next, I looked at the historical context, which was the history of domestic violence, how far back it went. I told you all the way back to Abraham, who had whose wife Sarah had she was the equivalent of a slave. She had a maid servant, and she was pulled into what we would consider surrogacy, but then that she was not willing, and there's no reason to believe that she was, and she was being raped by Sarah's husband. So you see the criminal activity that was happening even way back in the Old Testament from a historical standpoint. But then came Jesus. So I certainly looked at David and Bathsheba. People overlook what Bathsheba went through when she became the king's concubine. She lost her husband because part of David's conspiracy with himself was to take the husband away from her, especially when he found out that Bathsheba had conceived a child. Then God took the child from them, and so Bathsheba then lost a child. So she's lost her freedom. She lost a child. She lost her husband. And who was there to comfort her? Who gave her the warm hugs and the attention that she needed as a widow and as a mother who had just lost a child? I want to just highlight those points to society as well as to the church, that there's always a need to pay attention to people who are being victimized, and even in ways that we don't think is victimized, or we would rather not think that that's actually considered as abuse, but it was. But then in the New Testament, there was a great turn in the tide of events when Jesus began to not only stand up for the woman, but also to clear her history, as he did in Mary of Bethany, and that was the woman with the alabaster box who had so much sin in her life. As a result of the sin, she was ostracized and not necessarily wanted to be in society, and Jesus forgave her sins, and she ended up anointing his body just before his crucifixion. There was, as I've already said, the woman at the well. She was my focus scripture for the New Testament, the one who had already had 5 husbands, and Jesus actually was talking to her in the middle of the day in public, breaking all kinds of traditional laws or traditional rules as he did approach her. He asked her for water. I talked about the fact that water is used for so much. Even today, he asked her for drinking water, but he was willing to offer her water from a well within herself that would cause her to not thirst again. He could use that water on the inside of her to bathe her wounds, to bring healing to her life in ways that she never would have imagined, as he forgave her of all of her sin. One thing that we forget about it in a patriarchal society, especially in biblical days, is that the women had no status. They became prostitutes because they had no way of earning a living. You were expected to have a man over you, a man to take care of you, and a man to provide for you, whether it be a husband, a brother, a nephew, a son. And if you had none of those and you were out on your own, you had to make a living the best way you could. And that's why Jesus never was one to look down on a woman, even if she had a reputation of ill repute, because he knew that she had no other means by which to care for herself. That happens in the church today. I mean, the church is not always aware of and certainly not forthcoming to care for the needs of a woman, whether she's a widow or just a woman who's been abused and is now, or divorced, and now is struggling to survive, struggling to make it. Needless to say, I have my some very, very strong ideas about where the church is supposed to be today in the need of a woman. It hasn't changed that much since in the days of the Bible. And then I looked at theological foundations, and that's what other theologians wrote about and had their attitudes of concerning victims of abuse from a biblical standpoint. And there were also some very good ones. One of them, whose name was Howard Thurman, Dr. Howard Thurman. It was an old gentleman who was very in tune to the plight of the African American community and how we not only still had to endure abuse from slavery, and then once freed from slavery, still being ostracized and criticized. I was a child who had to ride in the back of the bus. I was a child who remember the bathroom and the water fountain for the blacks and for the whites being separate. And so not only did we have to endure that, but you also did not talk about being abused in your home. Needless to say, women, it got around town because we lived in small communities, but you never heard of a woman, hardly ever heard of a woman taking her husband to court or having her husband or lover be arrested for abuse. And so theologically, Dr. Thurman was very, very aware of the fact that the church has not been keeping up or holding up its part in caring for victims who were abused. I carried out several projects in my on the way to gathering data for my dissertation. One of them was I had a 6 weeks of sessions with actually targets, you all. I actually used targets in my project. We had 6 weeks of coming together and discussing what they considered to be abuse, whether it was in a personal physical relationship or from being targeted. And we talked about and sought to get some clarity and some comfort from what the Word of God had to say about it. It was very uplifting for me to be able to use the Word of God to validate for them that they were not being treated properly, but that God also was aware of where they were, and He would be the one who would vindicate us in our plight of seeking justice. One
Amazing.
of the things that, am I out of time?
No, you're not. You still have 15 minutes left.
Okay. Another project that I had that I did not do during the course of writing the dissertation, but I did was able to accomplish it afterwards, was a plan for me to have a retreat. And initially I was going to call it "Wow, Women of Worth, a Woman, You Are Worth It." And I'd like to read, I put it in my book now as a letter to the reader, but I actually prepared a 5-minute video, and it was called "The Hiding Place." And so I wrote, "Dear reader, this project was part of my candidacy review when I was a Doctor of Ministry student at United Theological Seminary. The title of the thesis is, at that time, was When Women Suffer in Silence from Domestic Violence, Abuse, a Journey to Healing, Recovery, and Restoration. Right now, we want to celebrate the fact that women can speak, that women's voices are being restored. Women are being empowered to stand up and say no to violence, abuse, and mistreatment of any kind. With their newfound freedom, women are then empowered to love themselves. They can look at themselves in the mirror and say, 'You're beautiful.' They can look themselves in the eyes and say, 'You're lovely.' She can tell herself, 'You are worth it.' You're worth the time, the energy, and the effort to become all you can be in God through the power of the Holy Spirit that is within you." In my mind's eye, I can see a picture of a waterfall, and this video was actually made with a waterfall behind me that reminds me of the central theme of this project. I chose the Samaritan woman who met Jesus at the well. The significance of the well is that Jesus offered her living water. Living water takes many forms and many shapes. Most importantly, living water allows us to live again. It allows us to live beyond our mistakes. It allows us to live beyond the pain of the past. It allows us to live beyond what we thought we should have, could have, or would have done had not this, that, or the other happened. Then it empowers us to look beyond where we are today into the future. We don't have just to look, but actually walk into the good plans that God has for us. Imagine yourself standing underneath this waterfall. Imagine that all of the hurt, the pain, the guilt, and the shame of the past are being washed away. Imagine that as the Samaritan woman walked out of the waterfall, there was nothing left but today, tomorrow, and the future. Now see that you can be that woman. You look, and standing in front of you is Jesus. He's holding his hands out to you, saying, "Nothing ever mattered to me but you. I want to see you succeed in life more than anything in this world." Jesus will send the Holy Spirit to help you. His job is to teach you, to guide you, and to intercede on your behalf. He will remind you of things that Jesus said about you in his word. There you find these statements: "You're the apple of my eye. You're precious in my sight." God meant it when he said, "You're tattooed to the palm of my hand, and your walls are ever before me." Jesus is there to remind you that every time you come upon a Goliath, every time there's a Jericho wall, every time a Pharaoh is barreling down behind you with his army, a Red Sea crossing is in front of you. God provided dry ground to cross the Red Sea. As you cross over from being a victim to having a victorious voice, there are stones that you can step across into the future. You'll walk into the blessings of the Lord that make you rich and add no sorrow. I want to invite you to find a waterfall and call it your hiding place. At the hiding place, you'll come to be with God. In his presence, you'll be restored, and you'll come to enjoy the presence of the Lord. In that place, you'll discover, woman, you are worth it. Woman, you're worth everything Jesus ever went through for you to be what only you can be. There is a blessing to the body of Christ when you are in your place, doing your thing according to the plans that God has for you. The prophet Jeremiah received a word from the Lord that said his plans for us are for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. I, too, have been victimized by violence as a child, a teenager, a young adult, and even as an adult. I've been victimized by violence. This violence was uninvited, unexpected, misdirected, and yet I've learned to stand in the strength of the Lord and say no. I encourage you to speak out. I encourage you to speak up. I encourage you to hold yourself up and your head up and know that you are worth it. You're worth everything that Jesus died on Calvary's cross for you to be. You're worth every ounce of energy that God used in the Holy Spirit's power to create Jesus as a baby in a woman's womb, to walk through the trauma, the rejection, and the pain just like we do. You're worth everything that Jesus brought up out of the grave for you at resurrection. And that's victory, victory, victory. So please join me in celebrating who you are as a woman. I celebrate your worth, your value, and most of all, your being the most loved person in this world because of God's plan for your life. At the retreat that we actually had regarding that, or related to this letter, it was entitled from Ashes to Beauty, and there were 85 women in attendance. We met at a state park that where the lodge had rooms in it, and every room faced the river. It was such a wonderful time. The women were so blessed, and we addressed every level. We addressed the physical needs, we addressed the psychological needs, and we addressed the spiritual needs. And I still have some of them asking when we're having another retreat. We've had one other retreat since then. That was in 2021. But the point is that women are worth the time that God spent to create us and the pain that Jesus endured, that we would not be a slave, but that we could live in victory. Thank you.
Absolutely incredible. Are you ready for questions from the audience?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, and Tranquility is our co-host, so she might ask a question too. That was very nice, and it moved me. My mother was abused, so I had to watch that growing up, and I was her little savior, so I kept her safe. But, yeah, it happens. But anyway, we have Q&A session now. Dr. Millicent Black, come on in and ask a question. Unmute yourself by doing *6, and you can talk to Dr. Black right now.
Hi, I have a question. For those who aren't aware, in 2020 you wrote Empowering Women Who Suffer in Silence from Domestic Abuse, from Victimhood to Voice Recovered and Restored. And of course, this year you released a new edition, Empowering Women Who Suffer in Silence from Domestic Abuse, from Victim to Voice, which we are here discussing today. Could you tell us what inspired the new edition and what are the main differences or updates that readers can expect between the two versions?
Dr. Black needs a *6, or I can do that for her. There she is. Dr. Black,
Okay.
Are you there?
I'm here now. Thank you for asking that question. What inspired the re-release of the book is that I ended up with a shyster as a publisher the first time. He refused to put doctor on my book, and I told him that that's what makes me the authority. But he refused to put doctor on the book. There were some errors that I was not proud of. I never got a penny of royalties. Even today, when I try to contact him, he's very abusive himself. So I never marketed that book, though I've had multiple agencies seeking me to let them work with me about getting the book published by major publishing companies and being in book fairs. I just had not done anything until I could have something that I was proud of. and till I could get money into my hand for my efforts versus going into the hands of the shyster. The guy knew that I was a target, and sometimes I think that maybe he expected that I would be dead by now and he would just be free to draw my royalties for the rest of his life.
Wow. Well, thank you for that answer. And I'm looking on Amazon, and I see what you mean. They have your first one just published by Millicent Black and not putting doctor. So, yes, I understand. That's awful.
And I bought clip art that I wanted to use for my cover. He wouldn't use that. You see, he's got the woman standing at some marsh that doesn't look very inviting or very alive at all. So there were multiple problems with that first release. You asked about the differences. The differences is that the information at the back, after the conclusion of obviously the letter to the church or to the reader, is something that I added. I also added a testimony by a young woman named Megan. Oh, I don't have her last name, but on her YouTube channel, it was Meegs, Meegsb.
I remember her from the 2019 conference in Sacramento.
Yes, she was following our group around to record, and this perpetrator says he's responsible for getting her YouTube channel taken down just after, or just before the book was released. Her YouTube channel got taken down, and there were 3 interviews for me there. I think the perpetrator is trying to limit the amount of live evidence that there is against him, as he threatens my life every single day. But so I got her to write a testimony there, and she talks about her own salvation and how being a Christian has changed her life in it, and I included that in the book as well. I also did an epilogue, and in the epilogue I told more about my own experience as being a victim of electronic harassment. So it went from 100 and something pages to over 200, about 240 pages.
Wow.
I saw that. That's great.
Awesome. I have another question.
Oh, come on in, Tranquility, with your question, please.
Okay. Dr. Millicent, what advice would you give to friends or family members of someone who is suffering in silence from domestic abuse?
My advice is to never keep silent. In the book of John, actually right after John 3:16, in the same book as John 3:16, Jesus said, men love dark rather than light because their deeds are evil. And I'm trying to get over there now so I can read it. Specific. It says, and this, John 3, I'm reading at verse 19, starting at 19. It says, and this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are worked in God. I encourage everyone to come forward to speak up about what their experiences are, what they are being forced to endure. The only way that evil can prevail is because good people keep silent. That was a paraphrase of a statement written by, oh gosh,
was that Martin Luther King?
No, he was a German.
Silence is complicit.
Yeah, he was a German theologian. You advise to use something from him in every book, in every paper that you wrote, every dissertation. Oh gosh, his name is Roland. And yes, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Yes. So the perpetrators are only able to continue to perpetrate when they are not exposed. When I contacted a clinical, she's actually a Christian clinical psychologist in the early years of me being targeted, the first question she asked me is, she said, what is he doing to make himself look credible in society? She said, usually they prop themselves up in some political place so that they look like they are. It's impossible for them to be who you say they are. And sure enough, he had come back into town finally and was on the planning commission, on the city planning commission. And within a year or so, he was the chairman of the planning commission for the city. And now, that was 2013, so now 11 years later, he's the vice chairman of the regional planning commission. And this region have 13 counties in it. So he's told me by V2K in the last year that he has been so politically positioned himself that nobody will let anything happen to him.
That's incredible, and that's RW, of course.
Of course.
From military to managing the city. Amazing.
The county. The
whole county, yes.
Yes. And he does brag about having everybody under his mind control. And so he feels that he can walk away from anything because he can get in people's heads at night and tell them what to do.
That's amazing. Yeah, we talked about him when you were on the Techno Crime Fighters, which I was a moderator on. So I've known you for about 7 years now, believe it or not.
Yes, that was an amazing time, and we covered a lot of ground.
Oh yes, absolutely amazing. And I remember all the good things about it, and all the information I learned was really vital to my targeting to learn about it. I think there's still videos out there about that with that show. It's called the Techno Crime Fighters. So yeah.
I actually have found some again. Yes, I was very glad to find some of them because we did have some very good ones. Unfortunately, some that Romola D and I did together are not. At least I haven't been able to find them yet. We talked about torture specifically. We did 3 episodes of talking specifically about what torture is, what the law says about torture, what the United Nations says about torture, and those were very, very informative as well.
I interviewed with Romola D myself, and we exposed the local sheriff's department, and that was disappeared too.
Oh, wow, yeah. There were some really, really good ones.
Yes, it was. Next question for Dr. Mosen Black, please.
Hello?
Come on in, hi.
Hi, I just want to tell Dr. Black that she was one of the earliest people I read about when I realized what targeting was. It took me a long time to figure out what was happening to me. And her story was very compelling and, very credible also. And I want to also just say I really enjoyed listening to you tonight, Dr. Black. And, the presentation you put together was very touching, I think, to me and probably very many other people.
Thank you.
Yes, it'll be on YouTube and BitChute, so you can review it again if you'd like.
And it is too bad that so many of the old videos were taken down from early because I discovered things around the time when you all, I guess it was probably around 2015 or 2016, when
right, that's about when I became active. Yes.
Yeah,
a lot
when all
of stuff
the folks
disappeared from that era.
Yeah, it's too bad because I think that would be so helpful to a lot of the newer targeted people too to have that, because you all did a lot of exposure of what was going on, and particularly with the gang stalking part, that helped people recognize what was going on. And once you recognize it, it helps you get a little bit more. You have enough information to start trying to make some changes to try to defend yourself, you know?
Right, exactly.
Let me also say, I encourage you all, if you are not keeping journals, do. That's another way that I know that the perps probably subliminally message us to not document anything. But let me tell you, if it's not written, it didn't happen. Now, that's the attitude in the medical profession. That's the attitude in the legal profession. So write down dates and times of the horrible things that are being done to you. Those records will be assessed or can be assessed to assign value to the torture that you've been through. Also, it's the days of the Techno Crime Fighter Forum were days because Dr. Catherine Horton was on. She added the international flair to it, and we were able to cover, a lot more ground. And obviously, her being a particle scientist helped to explain a lot of the ways that the atomic energy is being used to do us harm. I wish that we could find a way to do some of those things again, because the persons coming into the community now are younger, and my heart goes out to them. Some are the age of my granddaughter, who is in her late 20s. They're in their 30s, which is younger than my own children. And my heart just breaks. What are these kids going to do? How are they going to live being blackballed out of work? And my goodness, when I see them walking on the street and sitting on the side of the highway, it just breaks my heart, because I know that they're being targeted. Gratefully, our local library allows homeless to come in and find a place of shelter during the day, and they even let them sleep over on the side. They won't allow them to stay if people feel threatened, but they do allow them in, and I don't say a word because I know that most of them are targeted. I do offer to help them in terms of, a meal or drink or something, but just being able to recognize that someone else is targeted, they're not crazy, they're not mentally ill, the perpetrators are harming them. One Saturday morning, I was going to meet my family, and they were late or something, and I was parked beside Electronic Express, I think, and I saw something sticking out the side. It was like behind a pillar, y'all. It was near 0 degrees. And I walked over to see what in the world that was. It was a man covered up in a quilt, having slept on that cold sidewalk. And it just brings tears to my eyes, because these folks, and he said that I woke him up and I said, "Can I buy you coffee?" Because he was not, and we were in walking distance of a Waffle House, and he said they ran us out of there last night, because I was thinking if I just took him over there and paid for coffee or something, that they would let him sit in. And so the problem is getting worse. I believe that young people who don't get jobs and don't hold jobs are subliminally messaged not to. I don't believe they're making conscious decisions to not work. I believe that the social engineering programs are alive and well in our cities and our counties, trying to have an excuse to exterminate our young people. Y'all, we have to, those who are prayer warriors, prayers, we have to begin to stand up, at least in prayer, on behalf of our young people.
I agree. Well, thank you for the interview. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. We're going to end the recording in just a moment. But first, before you leave, we just want to do a quick shout-out to Tranquility and make sure she's taken care of with a quick commercial. As soon as I can find what I did with it. Oh, right there.
Welcome to TIEvents.org, your official insider for the targeted individual community. As the go-to source for all TI events, we're here to keep you in the loop with the latest and greatest happenings. Discover daily conference calls, meetups, and exclusive events across the USA, all at your fingertips. Plus, planning a TI event? Advertise with us for free and connect directly with the TI community. TIevents.org is not just a website. It's your gateway to a world of information, connection, and empowerment for TIs everywhere. TIevents.org, your official insider. Dive in and discover today.
Very nice. Thank you, Tranquility, for the questions. Thank you, Dr. Black, for your time. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and talk about my book. I'm working on running it on sale on Amazon for $14.99 instead of $19.99. I've got to get that in place. I'll try and do that tomorrow for those of you who might want to make a purchase of it. If you are still connected with a four-wall church, feel free to buy it and give it to your pastor or your women's group organization so that they can become aware of ways that they can start ministries that will support victims, whether they are victims of domestic violence from a physical relationship or victims of violence from our government. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Black. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the recording. So if you're watching us on your favorite platform, on Spotify, listening, or through BitChute or YouTube, please like, subscribe, and make a comment. And, of course, you can reach Dr. Black at the website she mentioned in the recording earlier. We'll have that website available in the notes. So we'll go ahead and end this recording now and switch to open mic.